Hello and welcome to class. It's LDR814 and it's week 4 assignments. So this week we're going to be continuing on with our discussion of the behavioral theories. However, let's first look at Dilbert's concept of leadership behaviors. Dogbert says, "I have studied the practices of famous leaders so that you can copy them. First of all, leaders work 16 hours every single day. 16 hours. And in your spare time, you should be reading about your industry to stay current." Reading? Okay, well, this isn't supposed to be working. What if I told you that famous leaders eat a lot of cake? I got the right response, and Dogbert walks away saying that took a creepy turn. So, what does the research and the theories say about how leaders are supposed to behave? Well, here's a little model schematic that shows one approach, one set of thinking about how this works. So we have leadership behaviors, and those are influenced by situational factors as well as the processes that leaders use to influence others. We know some leaders have position power and can simply tell people what to do. Other leaders need to use influence, need to use rewards, need to use coercion, need to use respect, a variety of different things in their behaviors that can cause the followers to interact the way they should. But also we have the interaction with the followers' attitudes and behaviors, and we'll be looking at some of the theories that try to include the readiness, what's called the readiness of the followers, and how that's going to influence the outcomes. And affecting all these, of course, we got situational factors that affect not only the leader's behaviors, but also the processes, as well as the follower attitudes and behaviors that they have. And all this, again, results in performance outcomes. Okay. Now you notice this comes from the Army ROTC. So this is one of the models that they use to develop their leadership programs within the military. Well, the one thing I would like you to look at is see at the beginning of this entire sequence of processes, we have leader traits. And remember, last week before, we were talking about how leadership traits was a kind of an obscure theory or obsolete that really didn't explain that much, and yet here we say that leaders are going to have particular traits. And actually, if you think about it, it makes sense. If a leader should be able to take command, leaders needs to have an extroverted nature so that they are willing to stand out in front of a group and tell people what to do. Perhaps one of the leadership traits from psychological testing would say this person has a high degree of extroversion. They're willing to stand up and make themselves the important person in the group. A person who's introverted would attempt to try to find ways to stay in the background. It would not necessarily step up and take a leadership position. Okay? And other aspects of leadership traits, again, probably would contribute to the types of behaviors that would seem natural when it came to exhibiting certain sorts of behaviors. So as you can see from this little diagram, it starts to get more complicated. And the thing about theories, it's kind of the point of this whole explanation here, is theories cannot usually deal with everything at the same time. Theories have to be fairly focused and try to identify specific things that happen and experiment with them and do studies in a more or less controlled environment. The problem is when we try to explain everything at the same time, we lose sight of the fact that this might be influencing this, but it causes a different reaction here than it does here. So when we look at the studies on leadership, they'll in some ways you might say, well, they're not very realistic because they don't take into account everything that could possibly be happening. But remember, the goal of theory is to develop something that can be proven or disproven by collecting data and doing analysis. And it's not that you won't find things that fall outside of that. That's why we use the idea of normal distributions and statistics. But the majority of behaviors fall within a particular set of categories, a particular set of boundaries. And as you think about, what you might do for your own research, that's what you have to think of. You have to think of how can I isolate one aspect of this leadership model and collect data that could be analyzed to say this is a general trend. Maybe not everybody falls into that category, but it's a strong enough correlation, or there's a strong enough statistical significance that this could say this is true, this actually happens. Okay, so that's the kind of the background for this week's assignments. The topic again is we're going to be looking additionally at the behavior-based leadership models. We'll be looking at more research that came after the original work that was done at Ohio State University and Michigan State, those studies. People are still going back and looking at the data and using the data to try to pull out more information. But you'll see here some additional research that's kind of built upon that. And again, that's the whole idea of the evolution of the leadership theories. So the assignment will be to read the readings that are supplied. The discussion is going to be based upon the leadership. Okay, you're going to be talking about what is going on with these models and what people are saying about them. You're going to be writing an 8 to 10 page paper which talks about the leadership models and its contribution to the evolution of leadership thinking and research. And by this time you should be getting the idea, sort of like we're not really so concerned about one single theory or one single approach or one single author. We're really trying to understand the nature of the evolution so that as we move our way forward, you've got a strong background on the essence that continued to be passed on from one set of research, one set of studies to the next set of studies. Because when you write your literature review for your dissertation, that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to be able to trace the idea that you want to work with back to the origins through the evolution of the theories that led to that particular point. Okay? So your paper is going to look at the behavioral leadership models and put them in the context of the evolution of the leadership research, and then also try to look at what people are talking about today. And again, I mainly mean from the research perspective. What are people doing research on that's related to these behavioral leadership models today? When you're writing a paper, pay attention to the requirements. If the paper says it's supposed to be 8 to 10 pages, that's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be 6 pages or not. Here we're talking about the body of the paper, not the title page and not the references at the end. Here it's supposed to be 8 to 10 pages of the body of the paper. And you want to be based upon the research, specifically the articles for the past couple of weeks. You can certainly refer to the trait-based theories as part of the background, but your report should not be focused on the theories from the earlier weeks. It should be focused on the behavioral theories. Remember, you're writing for a non-professional audience. Avoid jargon. Explain necessary terminology. If you're using a particular term that wouldn't be common knowledge to a general audience, then you have to explain what it is, where your definition came from. Try to write in a straightforward fashion. Don't be unnecessarily confusing. And, of course, follow your APA format and referencing requirements. And one of the things I always try to remind students about the importance of doing an outline. The outline, of course, will have your title page, which is separate, but then your introduction, which should explain what the topic is you're going to be writing about, why this topic is important, and how it will be addressed in the following paper, how you're going to address the topic. This forms kind of a contract with the reader so that the reader knows what to expect. The paper should then fulfill the contract. You should describe the topic in more detail. You should talk about, how you're going to explain the various points of the topic. And then those fit into the body of the paper. And again, these should be segmented. You should have a section with a heading that says, in this case, what does the evolution of leadership research actually mean? For the uninformed reader, they need to have that explained why this is important. Then for another section, you would have the elements of behavioral leadership, and you might want to break those down into several of the different approaches, several of the different studies that provided the elements of it. How are these elements manifested in today's management practices and research? Okay, so each one of these would be a heading, and the information within this particular section would be specifically for for that particular subtopic. You would have a transition into it, you would have a transition out of it, but the idea would be, as a reader, I could go to any one particular part. If I'm mostly interested in the elements of behavioral leadership theory, I should be able to go, just like with a table of contents, find that section and read that particular section. And of course, every paper needs to have a conclusion, which generally includes a brief summary of what went on within the paper and any additional future-looking, where does the research go from here, what other things need to be covered. But this gives you a chance to kind of put forward your own conclusions, your own recommendations based upon what you've said in the paper. And of course, your reference list. So every paper is going to be different. It shouldn't be just like this, but it should be, use the idea of separate sections, each section dealing with a separate part of your what I call your argument or your story, and they all should fit together to address the topic. So the keys to success. Look at the last paper that I returned to you, see what comments I made. Try to use the good things and avoid the bad things. Every now and then go back and review the Scholarly Writing Part 2 video, which is I just briefly summarized on the last slide. When you're writing, be sure to start writing early enough to allow enough time for your revisions. Many times I'll write on a comment that this is a good start, but it's not done. You may think it's done, but to me, it looks like a draft. It looks like there are still things that need to be improved. And I'm not talking about mechanical errors, although sometimes they are there. Many times I'm just talking about it's too disorganized. You haven't got it tightly wound together yet. You may need more references. You may be putting things in that need further explanation and definition. So really, writing is all about revision. The first draft is simply that's a way of getting your ideas down on paper, and it's really working through a series of revisions that you get it to the appropriate level for doctoral level work. Okay, we're not writing high school papers here. We're not writing undergraduate papers. These are supposed to be scholarly works that what you turn in is the very finished product. Okay. And of course, as we move along and you get more familiar with the references, with the body of literature related to this, you should have more and more references on each particular paper. It should be building up like a snowball effect. Okay, so until next time, I'll leave you with a beautiful scene off the coast of Scotland and the waves breaking in on the shore. So until next time, goodbye and good luck.